Welcome to the Leadership Puzzle. I'm your host, Jeff Lupinacci, co-founder of Evolve HR Solutions. In this project, we're taking a journey to uncover the mysteries of leadership with some of the world's most accomplished leaders. In each episode, we discover the distinct insight from each of these great leaders, enabling us to refine our leadership skills and become more effective leaders. Piece by piece, together, we will assemble the leadership puzzle. Hey, Dave, thank you so much for joining me today. It is really fantastic to have you on the Leadership Puzzle.
Pleasure to be here. Thanks, Jeff. We go back a ways, so it's nice to reunite and talk about a topic that we both are quite passionate about in the global world, I think.
Yeah, for sure. It feels like we've known each other for 20 plus years, but as I was thinking about it, it's only been like 11 or 12.
Yeah, it felt longer, which I don't know what is a statement about you or me, but it definitely feels like we've known each other a while. And of course, with Brian as a mutual contact, it takes us back, takes me back some 25 years. So,
Yeah.
to my early days with serving Walmart as a client. So maybe that's where my time perception is broken.
Well, I clearly remember meeting you for that first time in a steakhouse in Grapevine, Texas. So that started our friendship, which was great. So, well, I love superheroes and especially their origin stories, and you have an amazing origin story, an amazing career story. I think you have an entrepreneurial heart at the core of who you are. Tell us about your journey and how you got to where you are today.
Well, thank you for asking. It's probably one of my passion topics. First of all, entrepreneurs in general. Second of all, family-owned businesses, and had several clients along the way, which is a question that perhaps we can discuss later. Some of the big projects I've been working on and some of the ones that I'm most passionate about are helping families transition. The show Succession on multimedia is a pretty rude approach to something that to me is extremely passionate and important, to help founder owners keep their babies alive. And I had built my baby at Build a Firm and had transitioned that out through a merger. So I have great passion for those who invent an idea in their garage and want to take it and scale it. So that mine was really based on a 6:30 dinner table conversation when my father would come home every night and talk about some of the challenges that he and his firm faced that day. He had built one of the largest privately held public relations firms in the country, in the U.S., and his stories were about CEOs and C-suite individuals and some of the challenges that they were facing in crisis PR or image or brand or reputation management, and also just getting out ahead and promoting their products and services. And that was my MBA. That was my mini, exposure to the entrepreneurial world. And so to me, my brother's an entrepreneur. I'm an entrepreneur. My sister worked in a PR firm. I just feel like we're sort of wired that way to not be afraid of the risk associated with a startup or starting up your own firm. Client management, relationship management, CRM is a natural. Listening over talking, finding out, sussing out the need. What one of my colleagues called sculpting the fog. And really listening for what is the pain point that the client is trying to solve. That's all, to me, part of being an entrepreneur. There's a need, you invent a solution to it, and then you scale it. So that's, to me, really natural.
Yep.
And the opposite is not so natural. Being a part of a big corporation or a big company, even in the consulting arena, was probably not my greatest days. Because I tend to feel encumbered by processes or systems as opposed to free thinking and free flowing with the client.
Well, but you have worked for some like really large, well-known organizations and very successful. But I guess you just said, okay, I need to get back to something smaller, something that is more nimble?
Yeah, I think best when I have the one-on-one relationship with the client contact, the C-suite individual. And if there's 2 or 3 layers between me and that person, someone else owns the relationship and I'm just a subject matter expert, and I'm brought in on call number 2 or 3 to talk about an expertise, an area of help, a solution, but I don't hear the gut, the instincts, the nuance of the pain. If there's a translator between me and the pain or me and the relationship, then messages get lost in translation, truly. And I think we lose the sixth sense that we have when we are entrepreneurial consultants who hang with the client contact through text messaging and chatting and quick phone calls, and often coaching them as an executive coach. And you just pick up a lot more information, and through storytelling you're able to pick up what the problem you're solving and customize the solution to that pain point, as opposed to taking a survey off a shelf and saying, I want to sell 100 of these and book 7 figures in revenue. That doesn't jazz me up quite as much, which is
Sure.
fine. There's plenty of successful people doing major impact work and scaling it multiple times with the same solution, or a product off the shelf like a engagement survey, or it's not how I'm wired.
Sure. Sure. Well, because you've worked on both sides of the aisle, if you will, you started your own company, ran it successfully, sold it. You worked with big corporations. Is there any lessons that you might give someone who is interested in leaving the corporate world to build something on their own?
Great question, Jeff. I think there's 3 layers to your question. One is corporate, as in what I would call the industrial, the manufacturing, the consumer packaged goods, the consumer brands, the retail. That's the client to me, and I've never worked there. But I think there's a lot of people that run the distance of their career, have options, they vest, they cash out, they want to now move to a consulting environment. I have conversations almost weekly with leaders who are semi-retiring and coming out of that corporate world and want to have, leverage their subject matter expertise that they've accumulated by a function or department or an industry, and keep going. They can't just sit and eat bonbons. So, they're
Right.
definitely wanting to continue to add value and impact. There's the large consultancies, the Deloittes, the BCGs, the Bains, the McKinseys, the Korn Ferry, where I work, that are large consultancies, and you have a role in those organizations as a partner, as a director, as a leader, and you scale that role in volume. So I admire many of those folks who have the same key strategic relationship, trusted advisor relationship with those clients, and they own the client, and then they pull in a series of subject matter experts like myself. That was what I was referring to, which was a little trickier for
Sure.
me to feel the sixth sense about what the client was feeling if it was translated through an account manager, if you will. And then there's the small consultancy, whether you're your own 1099 or LLC, or whether you're a part of a smaller consulting firm. So I've been a part of a firm that was 10 or 12 people, and now I'm a part of a firm that's about 50 people. And in that case, you're sort of in, Goldilocks and the Three Bears, too big, too small, just right.
Yeah, right.
So this one is just right, and it really allows me to have colleagues and systems and processes and practices, and I don't have to send invoices. Or so my advice is to the person coming out of that corporate example I said first, is to figure out, do you want to join a firm that's 40 or 50 people? Do you want to join a firm that's 6,000 people and be a leader in residences? I think Ernst & Young or Deloitte calls it. Or do you want to set up your own LLC, which is peanuts? It doesn't take much at all to set up your own shingle, and then offer your expertise in 3 or 4 subject matters in 1 or 2 industries, and you're a gun for hire. You're basically either going in and being a CFO or a COO or a CEO for hire by the private equity firms or the venture firms, or just the C-suite finds you and calls you in as an interim, or you're consulting to those C-suites in the sense of counseling them through experiences that you've been through before. But you're your own, group of one, and you set up a QuickBooks account and a WordPress website and develop some IP, and you're just selling your time with a pad of paper. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. That's actually quite desirable for a lot of people who are in the denouement of their career.
Yeah, it's one of those things that someone coming out could very easily set up a lifestyle business. Well, they don't need the high six-figure salaries, but they want to have enough to enjoy life, but not sit on the couch and watch TV all day.
Correctly. 100%. And they can pick and choose. It's like a faucet. You can turn it on and off as much volume as you want and need, depending on your network. And people knowing that you're out there and you have subject matter expertise and you're for hire at whatever, $500 an hour, that's invaluable to them because you're a variable pay model. They can turn you on and off when they need you or don't need you. It's not impacting them with a head count, salary and benefits, the whole package. And on the other hand, if you want to go on a sabbatical or go 4 months to Australia, New Zealand, then, you can turn the faucet off for that period of time. I think one great example of a service that a lot of people have gone into that reflects what we're talking about is executive coaching or strategic advising.
Yeah.
Executive coaching obviously is a very important discipline. To be certified in it, you have to have command of several psychological assessments or styles inventories. But strategic advisory is almost the same thing, but it's done through the fact that you're not building the leader's executive presence or style or helping them prepare for some tricky meetings. You're actually doing business advisory as if you're one of the big consultancies, but you're doing it one-on-one in a very targeted way for an hour or 3 hours or a 20-hour project or whatever it is. And that is very desirable for people coming out of corporate.
Yeah, for sure. I want to shift a little bit because I consider you one of the world's leading experts on culture. You may not call yourself that, but I don't know that I've met anybody quite with your breadth and experience, whether it's cross-cultural or organization culture. When did your fascination with culture start, and what prompted you to make this your life's work, really?
There's a long story and a short story, and I'm going to give you the short one because this is a podcast. But I will give you the highlights of that long story in a short form. Absolutely started day one with playing the international game of football or soccer. And over half the team that I was playing on in college up in Minnesota was not from the U.S. And I was fascinated with how they behaved in a way that was consistent from a category standpoint: communication styles, decision-making styles, leadership styles, time orientation, relationship orientation, task orientation, these dimensions of culture that we've all come to love from our pioneers of our industry, Hofstadter, Trompenaars, Stella Ting Toomey, Edward Hall, etc. And so I was absolutely fascinated with how everybody wasn't behaving the same way, yet we were producing a pretty amazing soccer team to go win our division, our conference. I then worked in an international nonprofit musical organization called Up With People, which a lot of people know from way back. They came to their high school or church or synagogue or whatever. But Up With People was basically trying to put young people on a bus, on a plane, spend a week in a community, doing a 2-hour musical show, a Broadway type show, doing community service. And the cast itself was from 25 countries. So now I'm exposed to cultural differences, frontline. And I worked my way up to head 1/5 of the traveling organization. And that gave me management responsibility. So my finance manager, my marketing manager, my operations manager absolutely did not approach problems in the same way. And I was fascinated with why that was. So several other Up With People folks who had been on staff had gone into this industry called the intercultural relations or intercultural communications field, which I knew nothing about. And there were 3 or 4 schools at the time that specialized in a graduate degree in this space. You know, the Georgetowns and Lesley Graduate School is where I went in Cambridge, Mass. And you could get a master's in intercultural management or intercultural studies, which was part of the International Studies Division. And that's where we learned the discipline of the cultural dimension of how people are similar and different based on their nation state cultural backgrounds. And these are not stereotypes or generalizations. These are just conversation starters. So people have heard the thinness of that. They've heard, you know, Nova, GM car doesn't go, and Mexico didn't sell any. Okay, that's shallow to me. The depth of this work is, what's the why behind the behavior? It's rooted in 48 different elements of your unique personal cultural background, only one of which is nation state background, one of which is education, one of which is rural versus urban, one of which is gender, one of which is age, et cetera, et cetera. And when you add all those up, it creates a cultural mosaic of Jeff Lupinacci. It's just who you are, where you come from, and why you act the way you do. And no one has the same profile as you, and AKA me. I mean, the same for me. So when you think about those cultural backgrounds and you're able to give people a framework or a model that helps explain who we are, where we come from, and why we act the way we do, and it fosters bridges of understanding, communications. Now I'm back to my up with people days or my soccer field. I'm building bridges of relationship. And that's the same thing we just talked about with client relationship management, or what leaders in clients are trying to achieve with their executive leadership teams, with their direct reports, with the L2s, L3s, L4s. The whole organization is trying to achieve that level of trust and relationship, benefit of the doubt, psychological safety, respect, etc. So I, over time, shifted from individual one-on-one cultural differences between me, Dave Eaton from the United States, and Hiro from Japan, to, well, what about our teams trying to go through a merger and acquisition, to what are the pressures of a whole organizational culture on me and Hiro trying to achieve some kind of synergy in some kind of joint venture. And that is why I looked at it from the traditional OD model of individuals, teams, and organizations, and felt like cultural understanding or cultural challenges are going on at all 3 levels. Yeah. And so my career has morphed from doing cross-cultural training for expats relocating to country X with a subject matter expert alongside me and scaling that business up quite a bit, to what's going on with teams and how are teams functioning when they're brought together across multiple multinational presence, to what is the organizational culture that is actually having the greatest influence on these teams and individuals who are trying their best to do their, you know, OKRs or their KPIs or whatever, but they're influenced or controlled by some of the organizational pressures. And that's probably how I landed now, doing almost exclusively organizational culture transformation.
Interesting. Yeah, I remember one of your early presentations, you had a slide that looked like a stained glass window, and you had each little pane had a different attribute of culture, and that picture has stuck with me forever, because it was just a perfect, and you called it mosaic, and it is, but it's just this stained glass picture of how each one of us are unique.
Well, it's a great point. So I just mentioned when I had merged and sold my firm, and then I got to a new firm that was eventually bought by Korn Ferry. One of my colleagues or senior partners at this firm in the DEI and B space, the diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging space, had an exercise that really brought out the 6 buckets and the 48 attributes. That was a second version of that stained glass window. What my point of bringing this up again is, how the heck do we do what we do in a day of work, let alone in our personal lives, around a campfire, around a swimming pool? How on earth do we do that and think we'll be successful without knowing half of those stained glass panes?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. We dive into this work, we try to understand each other, but we don't know the why behind the behavior. And, you know, there was a model that I probably exposed you to at the time, which was AUAEA, First, you want to be aware of the similarities and differences between Jeff and Dave. Then you want to understand, that's the mosaic, the why behind Jeff's behavior, because most people go to level 3 then, which is acceptance or respect. How could Jeff be any other way? He's been hardwired and rewarded since birth this way. I get it. So that was the intercultural feel, which I just translated into the teams and organizational level, which is getting through AUA, awareness of what's going on, the what, understanding the why behind the behavior, which gets me then to a level of acceptance or respect. I still have my way versus your way. So now I go into step 4, which is evaluation. What are our options? My way, your way, or some third culture, some third way, which you remember.
Right.
And that third way has kind of been my calling card ever since. How do we get people out of an either or tug of war and into this third space where we co-create a 1 + 1 = 3, where the delta between 2 and 3 is also an innovation or some fresh idea that never existed in either legacy, organization, or pair. So that's probably my superpower if I would describe one.
Now, do you think that this move into this virtual world since COVID, how does that play with, individuals or teams or even the organization? How does that play within this cultural connection where folks can naturally find a third way if they are aware and understand and they build this respect and trust the organization?
A great question, and we've written quite a few blogs about this and read even more from others that I respect. Couple thoughts that aren't necessarily linear or connected. One is I'm terribly, terribly concerned about the younger half of the newer half of our workforce who is missing that walk the halls, printer culture, cooler culture, sixth sense that they gain from being in meetings. They don't ever have to open their mouth, but they just learn through absorption. We talk about the 70-20-10 learning journey, 70% experiential learning, 20% exposure, and 10% is all that's left now for classroom. It used to be 80-20 the other way. Well, those meeting rooms, those physical lunchrooms, those physical interactions are missing now. And that's 70% of, if not 20% of your learning. So terribly worried about, and my kids are employed now, and they're and as are yours, and those are examples of where they're not getting that hallway kind of experiential learning. The second thing that I would say, which is connected in my head at least, is 90% of communications is nonverbal. Edward Hall, the sociologist, used to talk about it. Now, if you add an intercultural concept called high context, low context, high context being, as you know, not a lot of words have to be exchanged for both sides to understand each other based on a lot of shared history, shared background, and shared experiences. You just understand each other like a spouse partnership. Well, when you take away the visual and you put people into an audio only, you're missing 90% of the remaining communications because you don't have access to the nonverbals. So now you have about a 95% chance to miscommunicate or misunderstand. And that scares me because now you are relying on audio only and verbal only. And if you hear somebody's intonation or tone of voice go up, you think they're mad. They might be passionate, might be cultural difference, that they're just showing enthusiasm. Or if somebody is avoiding conflict because their culture told them not to, disrupt face or camaraderie or collegiality or respect the hierarchy, now you're assuming they're not engaged. And they might just be giving you face or giving you respect. So to me, it's very concerning in this virtual world that we're missing 98% of the communications content.
Well, even the virtual, like we're doing now, we're going to miss. We'll see maybe some of the facial expressions, but you may not see anything else that's going on for those cultural clues.
Right, and so much of what we did was we'd be working on a common workshop desk or like an assembly line or a meeting room where we had visuals up on the walls. Most of my work was done with flip charts and PowerPoints and the wall was filled with ideas. I know there's plenty of software that can try to take that on. Groupware, Teamware, all the chalkboards or clipboards that are offered in MS Teams and Zoom, etc. you can't replace the physical energy of getting up out of your chair and running to the wall with a pen and a sticky note. I've run focus groups for the last 3.5 years using menti.com or Polo Everywhere. And it pales, it's great, but it pales in comparison to what, used to exist for a physical focus group in a physical conference room. And by the way, we're just talking about meetings. I mean, understanding an organization's culture, when I go in to do a culture assessment that takes, 1, 2, 3, 4 months to do, and there's data gathering through interviews and focus groups and surveys and qualitative verbatim comments and site visits and walking the halls, how on earth are you supposed to pick up culture virtually? You can't. So to me, our work has become much more challenging, and to transform culture or move from culture A to culture B is very, very difficult. So let's say a new CEO comes in, looks around, sees their leadership bench, and she or he doesn't like what they see and wants to shift the culture. We've lost our way on our values, whatever. Well, how are you going to fix that? How are you going to get into that? So we've found some creative ways, but I won't hesitate to walk in if a mask is required, so be it. Because I got to feel the hallways. I got to feel the culture. Fortunately, at FMG Leading, where I work now, we're really trying to transform healthcare. And healthcare is a frontline service industry. And these God-gifted people are all going to work every day and serving patients. So we have no hesitation to go in and do our work live and in person in a hospital or a healthcare system or a healthcare services organization that's serving the healthcare industry. So to me, that's where you connect humanity and performance. That's where you connect purpose to your work, and that to me is non-negotiable.
Yeah. Well, what's interesting is we both have worked in global organizations, so we've had virtual teams by virtue that I managed a team that was over in Malaysia or over in Russia, wherever it might be. So if you kind of extrapolate kind of the virtual component of what we're seeing in the workforce today, even if they're across town, how can leaders effectively navigate and foster a culture that resonates, whether it's across town team or across the globe team in a virtual space?
Well, I go back to how the most successful leaders and most successful teams become most successful. And I would argue that it's always been because they've had some face-to-face time, some trust building time, some team building time. And I don't mean one visit to Memphis and you have a team building and a dinner and then you call it a relationship. But I'm pretty sure that your teams in Malaysia and Russia, you were able to get face-to-face also. So now you have that trust, that benefit of the doubt, that I know Jeff has our best interests in mind, that if you're back to virtual, it's not the only interaction you've ever had. And so what happens during that quote unquote trust building when you were in Russia or when you were in Malaysia? You were doing a series of things to build their confidence, to build their trust, to be your authentic self as a leader. I know you were. And that carries a lot of weight when you go back to your virtual zone. So one of the struggles that I've seen over the last 4 years is people didn't have the opportunity to invest in that. My bigger comment is now we're getting lazy and not getting on airplanes to go do that. And now we can do that. And I would argue there's no choice but to get on a plane and go to Russia, or go to Malaysia, or go down to Memphis and build that trust and that benefit of the doubt so that you can build a bank and then tap into that bank account when you're virtual.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's some great wisdom there for sure. I think we could talk the rest of the hour on just culture and whatnot, but I want to start, kind of digging into your specific leadership puzzle piece, if you will. You have managed companies, you've managed teams, and if you think back on your journey, can you point to maybe a pivotal event that transformed your leadership so that it really blossomed into how you lead today?
It's a great question, and it gives me pause. There's several ways to go after that answer, but I think I'm going to simplify it or reduce it to one. I got some sage wisdom, and that word will come back from one of my clients and best friends of 29 years in Boston, who said, it's time to move from being the sage from the stage to a guide from the side. And that has stuck with me for the last 4 or 5 years. Why? Because it's super common with ego at the front of most of our realities, challenges, opportunities, whatever you want to call it, to be so worried about our brand and our reputation that we have to look like the smartest person in the room, and we can't ever look weak or uninformed or clueless or whatever. And the people I've admired the most are the ones that have shown up and not having to be in their proving orientation, as we call it in DEI&B, but improving orientation. So if I could give myself a bit of advice and wind back the clock earlier than I discovered this concept, I'd like to move from being a SME, a subject matter expert, move from being the authority or the smartest person in the room. I think I've always had a humble threat from my parents and my siblings, but I would argue that I was more ready to share the gospel, to share the tablets from the top, to share the expertise or opinion first, and then ask, how does everybody hear that? Any questions? To what do you think should be done? Which is really the basis of executive coaching, by the way, is not to tell the answer, or therapy is not to tell the answer, it's to get them to discover it. I think that's the piece that I would say was a pivotal moment when I went from, sage from the stage to guide from the side. And then you're following Lao Tzu, the famous Chinese philosopher, success is when people do it themselves. And I really love that concept.
Yeah, the idea of teach a man to fish and he'll eat for a lifetime. Yeah,
Right.
I love that. I love that. You've worked with a lot of world class leaders, executives, CEOs, and if you think about those interactions and the ones that have impressed you the most from a leadership perspective, are there traits that stand out that separate the really great ones from the ones that just good, if you will?
Sure, it's a great question. So a couple of things come to mind. One is they communicate extremely well, very articulate, but not boastful, not trying to use the most academic terms or an SAT term. They're really, yes, keep it simple, Stu, they're really simplifying it and making it very relatable communications. The second layer of that is back to our word humble or humility, which is one of our 3 values at FMG Leading. So it's very important that you go into those communications with furring and respectful communications and humble communications, and not coming off as boastful. I personally don't do well with arrogance. I don't do well with people who have a big ego, who are worried about looking weak or come off what we would call so confident that it actually is annoying. And so communications is key. Humility is the second one that is key. At the end of the day, I think there's a third, which is different for me. And it's something that I would say, if people said to me growing up, what's your number one most important value in life? I always had the same answer for 60 years, I think, 50 years, which is authentic or genuine. And so we hear a lot about authentic self, be your authentic self. How do you get your authentic self to emerge? That's the modern term for me of being genuine, being your genuine self. So leaders who are willing to be vulnerable, willing to be authentic, willing to not make it about them, but setting others up for success, being genuine and consistent is really something I admire and respect. And with that comes consistency. As parents, we learned early on that once you decide, it's done. You don't waffle, you don't go back and forth, you don't make exceptions. The kids can absolutely call you on it if you make a mistake on that. So part of being genuine and authentic is being true to yourself. And once you decide something, very much stick to what makes you tick, what makes you feel very real and honest with yourself. I don't mean that you can't be exposed and open to new ideas and changing your path based on input from others. I mean that it never deviates from your authentic or genuine self.
Sure. Well, and I think Jim Collins in his book Good to Great highlighted that humility versus will was a key characteristic of what great leaders had. So
I love that. Yeah,
yeah,
obviously a fourth, just to close this out, that I would share with you and others is culturally competent. So what does that mean? That's certainly not covered by the other three. So the ability to put yourself in someone else's shoes, be humble and to learn is consistent. But imagine reading their behavior with your, intercultural antennae up. And that's true domestically. You don't have to go overseas to be interculturally competent or culturally competent. And seeking to understand the why behind what you're observing and get to that level of acceptance or respect where you don't judge or will them to be different, but you just accept them for who they are. That awareness, understanding, acceptance, to me, is a universal trait of the best leaders, and particularly the global leaders who traveled the world seamlessly, flawlessly, and had the respect of multiple cultural backgrounds because they came off as so authentic, but also culturally competent.
I think you hit on something there, that your authentic self will actually translate extremely well across cultures, across regions of the U.S. Frankly, I mean, Texas versus Boston are going to have slightly different cultures, and if you're authentic and you're really trying to understand and build that relationship, then as long as you're giving grace and wanting to build that relationship, it's amazing how far the relationship can go. I want to have a little fun now, so I want to do a little lightning round. So I'll throw out a question, and first thing that comes to your mind. So let's do that. So, what is your favorite hobby?
Coaching kids in sports, particularly soccer. I love watching their development and the excitement for getting better.
So if you had one superpower that you would see in superhero movies and comic books, what would it be?
Jeff, it's going to sound a little trite, but I am desperately interested in world peace. And I don't mean that from the grandeur standpoint. I mean one culture and one relationship at a time, with your neighbor, with your workmate, with another religion, with another neighborhood. What's happening in the world now in 3 or 4 spots has always been my kryptonite. I hate it. I desperately want it to be better. There's no reason we have to have strife. It's usually rooted in ego. Back to that concept. So if I could, play a superpower, it would be to bring people together and build a third way, a through 1 + 1 = 3 solution to their anger or their frustration, and build peace in the world.
Nice. I like that. All right. The best meal you've ever had in your life?
Funny you should ask, because I'm down in Florida for a bit and we're going for a reunion at this restaurant. But I would say it's Long Island duckling, made at a restaurant called Euphemia Hay. And the bite of duck and the skin, which I could translate to Peking duck in China.
Okay.
It's the same bite with a little hoisin. In this case, it's a domestic version of that, but I'd say duck is one of my top bites. And of course, my number one bite that I'll seek in 40 or 50 countries of the world, particularly Japan, is unagi.
Unagi,
is eel,
nice.
as you know, in sushi. And that bite of unagi will take me to the moon.
No, nothing like fresh unagi from the Tokyo Fish Market.
Right.
So We could spend an hour just on that. All right. Speaking of like Tokyo and whatnot, what's the most exciting place that you've traveled to?
I would say, bar none, my favorite country in the world is China. And the reason I give when people ask me that question is I like being outside my cultural comfort zone. I'm a little freaky that way. I'm a little weird. And I like being in what we call cultural dissonance, a zone of cultural dissonance, which means I don't understand what's going on. I don't know the why. I'm not educated and experienced enough to know the why behind the behavior. And I spend all my energy trying to figure it out and show respect and build bridges. So China was the most extreme example of cultural dissonance that I've ever experienced, and I've been there a dozen times, and it doesn't get better. I am so clueless, and I seek to understand, and just when I think I've figured it out, I haven't. Part of it is obviously I don't speak the language fluently, but to me it's the most dissonant experience, and therefore the richest, and therefore the best experience I've ever had.
Like it. All right. So if you had one unique attribute or puzzle piece, if you will, that you bring to any team, what do you think that is?
I'd have to go back to sculpting the fog, which a friend of mine came up with. It's understanding, sussing out, as the British say, sussing out the need. A person might not even know what the need is. They're expressing pain. They're expressing a challenge. It doesn't have to be painful. It just has to be something negative that they're not happy about. And I peel back the onion, I peel back the layers, and we figure it out together, and then we develop a solution together that solves that. And I've done that for all 32 years of my consulting life, and it to me is the greatest happiness I get from watching them relax and realize we've identified the pathology of the pain, and we're going to solve it.
Pathology of the pain. That's nice. All right. Well, this is the time in the podcast where I love to give our guests an opportunity to highlight a nonprofit or a cause that they're passionate about. I think there's a couple that you have a passion around. Why don't you tell our audience about them?
So I would break it into two, and let's keep it simple. One is a roof over your head, and one is access to medicine. So I'm a big fan of Habitat for Humanity and the Restore Warehouse, where people donate items, and then the money that is raised by selling those items, which were donated, go to pay for building homes, as we know from Jimmy and Rosalind Carter. And for me, the magic really comes from allowing every single person in the world to have some kind of shelter from the elements: heat, cold, rain, hurricane, etc. So the fact that we don't all have that the whole world is not protected that way is painful to me. The second is I had a client once out of Denmark who brought insulin to Afghanistan. And it wasn't easy because you need refrigeration to hold the insulin pens. And to me, it's just absolutely painful to think about somebody dying because they couldn't get the most simple medicine that is we take for granted in the industrialized world. So if I could support one organization that I think does a pretty good job of attacking that problem, it's Médecins Sans Frontières, or Doctors Across Borders, which a former colleague of mine spends a lot of time with the management team, helping them achieve their goals of bringing medicine to the front lines in a proactive way.
Oh, that's great. That's great. Yeah. So Habitat for Humanity, is it Doctors Across Borders or Doctors Without Borders?
Sans Frontières without, so I might have translated it.
Okay.
But Doctors Without Borders, yeah, is the English.
Okay, that's what I'd heard of Doctors Without Borders, but so good. So I'll start. So Habitat for Humanity, that's habitat.org, or Doctors Without Borders is Doctors Without Borders, all one word, .org. Encourage you to go and check them out, donate, help them out. They're fantastic organizations doing some wonderful things in the world. Well, thanks, Dave. Those are great organizations to support. Now, I have one last question before we finish up. What advice would you give our listeners who are thinking about their leadership strategy and their leadership characteristics to help them grow their capabilities, whether they're leading a small team or a large team?
Wrap up question. I would say don't be afraid to put yourself in a position of vulnerability and learning. Don't worry about ego. Don't worry about being perfect. Don't worry about being the smartest person in the room. Don't fear the need to be an expert from the beginning. The more you put yourself out there in a journeyman apprenticeship type program, we learn a lot from our electricians and plumbers and others who go through the apprenticeship and journeyman program. Put yourself out there, be vulnerable, be weak, be in learning mode, be in improving orientation, have a growth mindset, a term we all know. And the learning curve, the learning journey will be exponentially accelerated. And you'll arrive in a place 10 years from now, 5 years from now, that you had no idea existed. And that's because you put yourself out there.
That's a great bit of wisdom. Well, Dave, thank you. This was truly spectacular. Loved having you on the program. Come back anytime. Thank you for spending time with us.
Thank you, Jeff, for having me. It's been a pleasure.